Welcome to another edition of Cults and the Culting of America podcast. My name is Scot Loyd and Daniella. How are you?
I am good. Coming to you from Seattle, where it is not 7:30 at night, which is lovely.
Yeah, it's a little earlier. You've been all over the country in the knitting cult RV.
Yeah. 2 countries. We went all over Canada too. Yeah.
Fun is
We've
that? So
run into fans along the way. I think we have like 40 people coming out to see us in Seattle tonight right after this. So it's pretty exciting.
absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of exciting, I'm glad to introduce our guest for this evening. Her name is Jess. And Jess, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, my name's Jess. I am clearly a white woman. I'm autistic. I have ADHD, multiple different things I won't go into. I have my Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and I became a registered nurse in 2019. Currently, my license is inactive due to a technical issue. But yeah, so I'm presently unemployed, primarily dedicating my time to social media. I go by White Mess Express on there.
Well, we're thrilled to have you tonight, and we're going to be talking about how I think we can all agree, right, that the health industry in the United States, the healthcare system is pretty much a horrible mess. But beyond that, you're here to make the argument, and I tend to agree with you that it's also a little bit culty. What do you mean by that?
Well, where do I start? Uh, I think, I mean, there is so much in the nursing profession in general. So obviously, I'm not the expert on cults, but I do know that when you, sorry, my dog is okay. I do know that when you are moving up, it's almost like there's a tiered system. So you have to start at this level, and then at some point, maybe you'll be competent enough to move to the next level. There's this whole thing with nurses. When I was a new grad, they said, "Oh, you have to start on med surg. You can't work outpatient as a new grad. That's not a thing." And I was like, "But I don't want to work medical surgical nursing." And it didn't compute in my brain why that was necessary. And it was because it was almost like a rite of passage, like that you have to work this horrible unit before you can do something you actually want to do. So yeah.
Let me jump in on that because we see that all the time, right? And we recently had a podcast guest who said that in their cult, like everyone had to start at the bottom, and including, their husband came in with all these technical skills, had to start off at the bottom. What you talk about, that was my experience in the Army, where they're like, lieutenant is a lieutenant is a lieutenant. We don't care what skills you have brought in with you. So we're going to take Daniella, a trilingual woman, and make you go do the same thing. And it is that exactly that rite of passage that, like, and a lot of Christian cults do the whole, you have to be a baby, we got to bring you back to basically infantilize you and make sure that we've put you all through this basic experience where we get to humble you. And if we don't know, degradation experiences, degradation rituals is another big part of cults.
Yep. And that is a huge thing in nursing. I'm sure you've heard about the people that talk about like the bullying that happens, like especially with new nurses or travel nurses. There is a whole kind of culture of you're either up here or you're not, and you are literally called a baby nurse when you come out of nursing. Like that's what they call you, like what you just said. They refer to you as a baby nurse, and every time you start a new nursing position with a different, so if I worked in oncology and then I switched to a different kind of unit or a different outpatient environment, I would again be a baby nurse because I don't know anything anymore.
And when they do those kinds of things, what do they tell you is the purpose of it, or what does anybody talk about that? Does anybody try to justify it?
Yes. So I wrote something down earlier because I didn't want to forget. And I think it speaks to that. And one of those is you must be constantly learning, but not if it's on topics that aren't approved or your scope of practice. So please be always learning, and that's why you're the baby nurse, unless it's about these things. You must critically think, but not if you're rocking the boat. You must come to work when you're sick, but if you kill a cancer patient because you came to work with the flu, like, you'll live with that. That'll be your problem. So it's a lot of these, like, yes, be constantly learning, because that's why you're a baby nurse again, because you always can learn more, but not too much. You don't want to step on toes.
And that sounds like a lot of what we've discussed here on this program as far as cult tactics. And so when people, I suppose that you're also punished if anybody speaks out about it or complains about the process.
Yes, it's somewhat. So I think one thing that's a little bit unique about healthcare is that it really talks so much about this environment of that it's a systemic problem, not a personal problem. But then we see all the time, I was just terminated from a job for not being productive enough in February. Productive enough, like meaning I wasn't working fast enough as they wanted me to work, because speed is not my skill set. I do have multiple of them, but speed is not one. And so people are suffering the consequences of that all the time. So they talk about quality and how it's a systemic problem, but you're still treated on an individual basis according to how much you're contributing or not contributing, if that makes sense.
And that ends up being a huge thing that I find across the board with cults is, blaming individuals for systemic issues and or having everything be an individual's fault and just sort of never willing to look at the larger problem. And hint, hint, maybe the larger problem is everyone isn't exactly the same. And if you actually put people in areas of their skill set, they're going to do much better. I will tell you, like, everything that I talk about, everyone else that compares all their stuff to what I talk about, the two that I absolutely get the most are teaching and nursing. And very recently, I've started to think of, the whole medical system or healthcare system in the US as its own cult, like this one big system that's over everything. Why nursing specifically? Why is nursing more intense and more culty than like doctors?
That is a very good question. I think my personal opinion would be that the doctors are in the position of power. So it's not that they aren't in the culty behaviors or that in and of itself. As we know, a lot of doctors struggle with mental health issues. But they are typically the ones that are looked to as the authority, whereas nurses are less than. We're the ones that must follow the orders, follow the direction. Florence Nightingale has a lot of history that's not great, but people still do the Florence Nightingale pledge for nurses, which basically says sacrifice yourself, put your patients first in everything you do, and like something about being pure. The actual pledge is a little wild. So it was created this way. And when I was 19, I went to, or not 19, it was in 2019, sorry. I went to London, England, for a public health and nursing trip with my nursing school. And they talked about the history of how nurses were single women that didn't like have families or lives outside, and they would actually live at the hospitals to work. So I think from the, not necessarily the beginning, but since years and years ago, nurses were built to be kind of a culty little group, if that, yeah.
Well, and it makes sense because what we see from like more traditional cults, we see many more women that will get out and tell their stories than men. And one of the reasons we think that that's true is because, well, the men quite simply aren't usually getting the most abused by the cult system. So I guess nurses are like the women of cult and doctors are the men. Obviously, it often breaks down that way too. But what you said about the abuse being stronger on the nurses, that makes so much more sense to me.
Yeah, and surprise, surprise, patriarchy and sexism raise their ugly head once again, right? It's like it's in everything. I want to talk a little bit about the healthcare system in the United States in general. Um, why is it, as somebody who has worked on the inside of that profession, why is it that you think we have so many issues with our healthcare system in the United States? Is it capitalism? Is it money that is driving it? And if so, is there anything that we can do about it? Or do you see any hope on the horizon for it changing?
That's a really, really good question. I don't even know how to answer that. It's definitely a mess. I do think so. I've heard it said before, and I do agree with that. Healthcare is a business in the U.S. It's a business. So I do think it is about the money. Now, there's not for profit hospitals, but they have to have a profit sector, and they rely on the government programs like Medicare, Medicaid to function. So I do think it is about making money, and this is going to not be very hopeful, but I don't really see it getting better. I think that I only see it getting worse, and a lot of healthcare employees have felt that way for years, and especially the direction that things are going right now. We're moving so far away from any inkling of a universal healthcare system
Yeah.
that it's not looking good from my perspective, but I do think that it's even more so functioning as a business now. Sorry, my dog just decided he wanted to be the star of the show tonight.
Oh, that's fine. Hey, it strikes me that for so long in the United States, we have approached healthcare as a privilege instead of a right. And as long as we continue to view it through that perspective, we're going to continue to have these issues because it attaches to what you've already touched on, the idea of how women are treated, but it extends beyond that, right? If we talk about the rest of the marginalized people groups in our society, Black and brown individuals, Black women especially, poor people in our society. So many times we see that the marginalized or the oppressed are on the fringes. And because we treat healthcare as a privilege for those that can afford it and not as a right for those that have it, we continue to have this cycle in the United States. I'm curious, as a nurse who's worked in the profession, um, obviously your first priority is to care for the patient, but beyond that, do doctors and nurses, do you talk about these particular issues, or do doctors and nurses really not have a say in how prices are set, things of that nature, the economic end of the healthcare system, if you will?
It's a really, really good question. Uh, we may talk about it, but it's more of an opinion base. Typically, unless you are in some way ahead of a board for the hospital as a doctor, you are not involved in the money making decisions of the hospital or how much the care costs. And those things a lot of times aren't even determined by the hospital itself. It's by insurance metrics and all of these different things. And so you really aren't involved in that conversation. And typically, the people that are, at least in my experience, the people that are the most involved either don't have any patient care experience or very little. Uh, they weren't the ones that started, from, I don't like to use the terminology, but like from the bottom, if you will, like as a CNA or something. They're the ones that just went to school for healthcare business and got their masters, and now they wear a suit and come to work a couple days a week, and they're the ones that are deciding all of these things. And I completely agree that it should be a basic right. It is a basic human right to have healthcare, and it is very much so treated like a privilege. And we don't have really any say in that. But we're the ones delivering that care, so we are the ones that get told about it, I guess.
Right, and you also have to deliver the news, right, to a patient if they need a certain procedure or a certain drug or a certain plan of care, and their insurance doesn't cover it. There's nothing that you can do as providers on your end to provide that for them.
Yeah, not much. Sometimes there's some programs that we can look into, but even that's while you're doing 20 million other things, and so it's very hard to juggle. And if there's not a specific program, yeah, we don't have much control. So what happens is we end up mainly caring for those with some aspect of privilege, or those that are critical and don't have a choice any longer.
And people go into debt, right? Like, one of the main reasons Americans declare bankruptcy is medical debt. And this was South Africa after apartheid. I was listening to Trevor Noah's amazing book for the third time, Born a Crime. It's so good. And there's this part where his mother literally has been shot in the head, and they're literally telling him she doesn't have insurance. And if you can't put down a credit card for could be millions of dollars, we have to send her somewhere else. And it's one of those moments, I feel like we're almost there in the US, and it's one of those moments that makes you realize it's like the first thing about America, right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do people have a right to life if you don't have accessible healthcare?
Exactly.
My mother is 90 years old now, and me and my siblings are facing the difficulty of transitioning her into an assisted living care facility. And we're having to navigate all of the issues that have to do with Medicaid and Medicare. And we see that from legislation that has been passed recently in the United States, that all of that is becoming increasingly more complicated. And if we talk about the aspect of the cultiness of the healthcare profession and system in our country, like so many other cults, right? The folks that end up getting hurt by this are the most vulnerable, or the people that are there providing the services. As you've already mentioned, as a nurse, you have to deal with all of this, for lack of a better term. I think hazing fits, right? It's bullying and hazing and initiation into that. And then you have the added pressure of dealing with people and patients that can't afford the services. So that's got to be incredibly frustrating. And you mentioned the mental health issues. That just adds to the trauma on the front lines of people that are endeavoring to help the most vulnerable. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your experiences, or maybe something that you have experienced along those lines, whether it's helping someone, endeavoring to help someone that's vulnerable, or what you've experienced from other professionals as you're trying to be the trained nurse that you are?
Yeah, yes, and all of that is so accurate. So on the vulnerability, I'm trying to think. I feel honestly sometimes like I've blocked out so much of my like nursing experiences because it's just not very pleasant to think about. But I there has been so many times that there has been such vulnerable people that either should be sent home, but they don't have a place to go, or they are, treated differently by the healthcare system as a whole for who they are or the conditions that they have. And it's very evident when you see people that are marginalized. So one example I can think of is we had one patient that was there, and it was a man that was unhoused, and there was this situation where like he did not have clothes to wear because they had been destroyed essentially or soiled before coming into the hospital, and there's no they didn't have anything to do about that. So generally, if a patient is unhoused, like when he gets discharged and goes home, he would either need to put back on the soiled clothes because they're not going to put clothes from the street into the laundry, or he would have to leave the hospital in like paper scrubs that the doctors and nurses wear. So there's already a societal judgment for unhoused people in the first place. And so then if you're discharging them from the hospital and they are wearing paper scrubs, for instance, what people see is not necessarily the situation. They see someone that's unwell in some way, shape, or form. And so in that specific patient's case, like, and this isn't to get, a cookie or a trophy, but it was around Thanksgiving. I took my little sister. I was like, hey, you and your friend are going to learn about like what, being thankful is all about today. And we're going to get some clothes for this patient on this floor. So let's go. And we went and got, just like an outfit or whatever and took it to him. But if it wasn't for that, I don't think that there would have been very many options for him to have. And so it's put on the people that either work there or choose to, because there aren't systems in place for the most vulnerable.
Yeah, and that's real. And I imagine you could tell 1,000 stories like that, and there's 1,000 stories like that, just in our society. When you were training to become a nurse, what surprised you when you actually became a nurse versus when you were preparing to be a nurse? I think all of us sort of have that experience, and it dovetails with the cult experience, right? Because cults often make these promises that they never deliver on to candidates, and I imagine the nursing profession was the same way. So, what did you expect going into the nursing profession as you were preparing, and then what was the reality, and what surprised you the most after becoming a nurse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So much. So this is not a very common experience, I don't think, with nurses, but I'm not really sure why I became a nurse. Well, I know a little bit, but I was a CNA because I just wanted benefits and I wanted to make money because I had been a hostess, waitress, or bartender for years, and I wanted something consistent because then I would be a real adult. So that's why I ended up going to nursing school, because I loved my memory care patients. They were all older and I loved them so much. And so I was like, well, I love these people, so I might as well become a nurse. They really push the fact that you make really good money, that you have really good benefits, that it's in some ways, like in many ways, easier than a lot of other jobs. And CNA is hard work. Like I think that's one of the most difficult jobs in a hospital personally. You're pushing, pulling, cleaning, like doing all the things. And so they really push that there's going to be this like pink clouds and rainbows or whatever the saying is that's going to be afterwards. And you're just going to be like happy, like I'm a nurse and everything's great. That I did not find to be true. And also maybe that is true for some people, but many times you're sacrificing your mental health, your physical health, um, your quality of life. So anything less than a 12-hour shift in the nursing world and a lot of healthcare is called a princess shift. So the expectation is to work at least 12 hours, and anything less than that, like you're a princess that day. Like that's how much you're expected to work. And most places have mandatory overtime. So you're not even just going to work, those 36 hours plus whatever, give or take, but you're going to be working over that. And you're literally only going to have time to sleep and maybe eat. Although many times I just didn't even choose to eat. I just went to bed. So that's probably one of the biggest, I would say one of the biggest things is the quality of life that you'll have, that they really talk about how this is great, but it's not. And
It
yeah,
it's so similar to being a soldier, I think, honestly, where it's like, the whole time you're being recruited into the military, nobody's ever like, you're going to work 12 hours a day. When you're expected to show up at 6 o'clock in the morning to work out, and you don't typically go home till 5 or 6 at night, like you're working 12 hours a day all the time. The military, like we don't have overtime, right? Like you're just going to work overtime whenever they want you to. And then, the other thing of what you said that really stood out to me is the expectation for the continual self-sacrifice, right? And this is one of the things that I find to be literally a deceptive part of the process, which is the amount that you're going to be told every day that you're expected to self-sacrifice. And I think in nursing, just like in soldiering, because it's so easy to tie it to life and death, right? It's easy for them to be like, well, you just got to do it. You just got to suck it up. In the Army, we literally have a saying, embrace the suck, and I truly, truly believe that the constant requirement for self-sacrifice is the reason why we always see suicides associated with cults, because nobody can just give and give and give and give.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I'm sure it's like, I don't know for sure, but I imagine that it would be like this in the military as well, where you're also not allowed to outwardly show any of your emotion or dissatisfaction with what's happening. So we were literally taught in nursing school, like you're going to go do CPR on a patient, which this happened multiple times. Like you're going to go try to save a patient's life. You're not going to save their life. And you can go in the bathroom and your eyes can tear up and you can like cry for like 2 seconds. And then you need to put your nurse face on. Like this is what the teachers would do. They'd be like, nurse face, nurse face. And then you get back out there and you go take care of your other patients and you're fine. Like you needed to put on essentially a mask as soon as you exited that moment to yourself, where you were no longer feeling any of the emotions, so that nobody could tell. You'd be like, hi, Mrs. Smith, what a great day, as you just like saw someone die.
I literally have probably talked about this on this podcast too many times, but I had an event overseas where we lost 10 people in one day, right? And so the next day at the funeral, I literally get pulled aside and questioned as to why I am crying, and that it's unprofessional and it's making them think I was having an inappropriate relationship with one of the men. And then I'm literally told again, don't let your soldiers see you cry. I'm very proud of the fact that I angrily stomped over to my soldiers and said, let's go. We're all going to go cry. But this
that.
Emotional deadening that you're supposed to have. And this, like, even just the idea that your patient seeing you upset by somebody else's death would upset them. I feel like having a nurse whose emotions I could see would probably be more comforting to somebody in a hospital than nurse face. But not in a cult.
Nope. And they don't teach you that either. They don't teach you how to interact with like families and stuff when you're not that they should, but they don't, you're expected to not have this emotion, but then they don't really tell you. Like I remember the first time that I had a patient that was, coding in a very, very emergent situation. It was before they let families into the room. Now, a lot of hospitals will do it where they'll let the family stay bedside while all of the stuff is going on for transparency, I guess. But the wife was standing outside of the room, and I went over there and I didn't even know it wasn't my patient, but she was just standing there all alone outside the room. Well, potentially her spouse is, like dying in the room. And I had no idea what do you say to that? So I was like, do you want a cup of coffee? And she was like, no, I'm good. But like I had nothing. Like there was nothing in my brain except to ask if she wanted coffee. Because what do you say to people?
This is actually something that stood out to me. So my daughter, when she was born, did not breathe for 7 minutes. I'm pretty sure it's just because she's that ornery and nobody asked her if she was ready to breathe yet. But what stood out to me the most, right? So it's like, right, I'm lying in the bed. My husband's like, why is she blue? They boom, code pink, 12 people are in the room. And nobody the entire time said one word to me about like, it's going to be okay. There was literally not one thing from the people. And it's like, you're very glad that they're focused on the child. And I asked about it afterwards, and he actually said, the doctor said, yeah, labor and delivery is the most sued of anything. And like, they can't tell you it's going to be okay, because what if it's not, and that, like, it's not like I have an answer of what they should have said. It was just very isolating and alone at a crazy, crazy time.
I can't imagine, especially right after. I never worked labor and delivery, but I can't imagine, especially right after. Like, that's when you're supposed to
30
it's
hours of
supposed
labor.
to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jess, I'm curious, as someone who worked as a nurse on the inside and perhaps have had opportunities now to go to the doctor and to be a patient, how have your experiences changed the way that you interact with your healthcare providers?
Yeah. Well, I have some, I guess, strong opinions as far as that goes. So I think, and Daniela was talking a little bit about it earlier. This wasn't the terminology you used, but it was something like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, like suck it up, deal with it. That's also, I think, the way a lot of us were raised as kids to do. And I think working in healthcare, it reaffirms that narrative even more, even in going to the doctor and interacting with your own doctors, where I'm like, okay, well, I have to seem like I'm okay, I have it all together, or they might think that I'm seeking drugs, or that I'm hysterical, in quotes, for lack of a better word. And I had multiple horrible experiences in the emergency room and in doctors' offices, like, where they just didn't listen, and I did not know what to do. I was like, what am I supposed to do? Because people, like, many healthcare providers won't listen if you're too emotional or too anxious, or because they think that must be the reason why. But they also won't listen if you're too okay, or like you're too put together, or you're too this or that. And so I would try to make sure that I wore certain outfits, because I had heard things people had said about how you should be dressed. I would tell everybody, like, I'm a nurse. Did that make me get treated any better? I don't think so, but maybe. And so it, coming from that side of it, I think that many of us trust the healthcare system less than maybe the public does. But we're also supposed to stand behind that no matter what. Don't speak ill of it in public by any means.
Yeah, and that tracks, right? Because you've seen it up close, you've seen it firsthand, and so you're in a position to know, right? And that's, there's so much of this, for lack of a better term, toxic positivity that gets tossed around in our nation when it comes to a lot of these instances. We're not willing, as a society, to deal with the problems, and what isn't acknowledged will never change. And so kudos to you on speaking out about this. I wonder, was there a particular moment, or was it a collection of experiences? We use this terminology when we're talking about cults, when the brainwashing started to crack for you, and you saw, hey, this isn't what I was promised. It's not what is presented to the public. Or was it a collection of instances for you?
I think it was most likely a collection. I can name a time that I started to think, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. Earlier, we were talking about the promises that were made that didn't come true. So something a lot of people say about nursing in particular is, you can do anything with nursing. You can do anything. So what I wanted to do long term was to work for the CDC and do epidemiology type. Like I wanted to do data, infectious disease, that kind of thing, like investigations regarding healthcare. That was what I really wanted to do. Well, as it turns out, it's very, very competitive and they prefer doctors for that program. So that wasn't really, I could have tried, but it wasn't necessarily realistic. So if you combine that with with all of the little things that come, for instance, I started having back problems. Only I would say about 2 years after I graduated nursing school, most likely from working as a CNA and a nurse for all this time, but my disc had completely collapsed. So I could no longer walk anymore to work my shifts. And I said like, "Hey, is there any administrative work that I can do?" No, we don't have that. That's not, we don't have 40 hours a week for you as far as that goes. So you're going to need to take FMLA or do something else. And so then it started clicking, like you can do anything with nursing or with healthcare as long as you are able-bodied enough, as long as you are like mentally fit enough, as long as you are all of these things.
I also think there's this thing with cults where they're like, it's part of the deceptive recruiting. It's like, you can do anything in theory. And there's an example of someone who did it, right? So this is true in the Army, right? So I wanted to be a foreign area officer, which is basically the military's diplomats. And they'll tell you about that program. They won't tell you that you don't even get a chance to apply for 7 years. So you're going to, what we call in the military, kick rocks for 7 years. We're going to get 7 years of your labor. And then you can apply, And I remember when I was getting out of the military, I was like, no, this is ridiculous. I'm not giving you any more of my time when you can't even promise me a path into this. And somebody said to me, they're like, well, Daniella, you're not just going to walk into an embassy and run the joint. And I was like, no, but I could walk into an embassy and get a job there at entry level with skills that I already have. Right. And so the military does that, just like nurse, where they literally say you can do anything in the military, any job that you want to have. Like the military is a version of that. And that's a huge point for them in recruiting. But they don't actually talk about like your odds of actually doing that, your odds of actually getting into that program and what that looks like. And this is, to me, this is like part of the question that Scott asked earlier, which is just like, what were the things that surprise you when you actually get in? Because I think if they wanted to let people know what the military was really like, they could. If we wanted doctors and nurses to know what the medical system was like beforehand, they could. But they pretty much wait till you are in. You've bought in so hard that they then just think you're going to keep going with
and
this.
If they
like,
would, yeah, and if they would actually tell people the truth on the front end, it's likely that you would have better quality recruits because they would know exactly what they're signing up for. And there's a large part of the population that wants that kind of challenge, that rises to the occasion. I think Daniella is a excellent example of that kind of person, right? And Jess, you had that kind of experience as well, right? You wanted to be a part of this, but once you got on the inside, it was completely different than what you expected.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the goalpost constantly moves too, like to what y'all were saying. So like once you, at least for nursing, once you're doing it and you're like, this money or the benefits or the quality of life isn't what I thought it would be, then people start saying like, oh, are you going to go back and get your nurse practitioner? No, I hate this job. Why would I do that? Like, I don't actually want to do this at all. I should have went for public health. It would have been way easier and less time consuming. But it's too late now and I'm in debt and also disabled. So then it's like a vicious cycle kind of.
Jess, if you were to give some advice to those of us who haven't had the experiences that you've had from the inside of the health profession, is there anything that I can do? Is there anything that someone listening in our audience can do to be a better patient, right? If we go into the doctor's office are there questions that we should ask that perhaps we aren't asking? Or do doctors and nurses get offended? Like if I show up with information like I'm buying a car and I've done my homework, that kind of thing? Or how does that work?
That's a good question. So often people do. I am a person that likes a plethora of excessive information, so I would never get offended if somebody did their research, so to speak. But many people do think that if you're trying to, tell them what's what, that is typically frowned upon. Although that is to say that especially with rare diseases, sometimes the healthcare professionals have no idea what they are. They haven't heard of that, what they're doing. So they don't really know. That is to say that I think it's such a short staffed field. And so the main thing that I could think of as far as like to be a better patient is just remembering that none of these people are on a pedestal, and specifically nurses and any other medical professional that's not necessarily a doctor or in a position of authority. So like medical assistants, nursing assistants. I think to remember that they're dealing with all of the front lines. And when people do express gratitude, it really does go a really long way, because, usually what they're getting is a pizza party from the company. And there's like a big joke on social media about the pizza parties, because that's what they do to say thank you to nurses, is throw this big pizza party instead of actually doing something that people would want. Like, yeah, pizza's great and all, but like,
They do
we
that
could
for
buy our own
seventh graders
pizza.
as well, right? They do that for seventh graders.
Yeah. Or they'll give you like a little coffee mug with like the hospital name on it. Like, yeah. And so sometimes like the biggest reward that, at least when I was still working, the biggest reward I could get was for a patient to express, like genuine gratitude. And that like got me through my day, a lot of days.
Yeah. It's also, kind of an interesting thing of like an interesting balance between like the doctor might be an expert on medicine, but you're an expert on you. And I think, there's so much about authority when it comes to cults and coercive control, and simply like what you said, just like understanding like they're not on a pedestal. This is just a person that went to school for something you didn't go to school for, and they're not more special, more important, or anything than you are. Because so many times people just don't stand up for themselves in
Right.
hospitals, and that can be a huge thing.
I totally agree. That made me think of how paternalistic it can be, which, with the cults and white supremacy and all of that, it all goes hand in hand. But like the doctor patient relationship is often, or even sometimes the nurse patient relationship is often, I know best and you should listen to me and do as I say, or, follow directions and then you'll be good. But you're exactly right that your body and yourself, and it's okay to say that did not work for me before. And if you will not help me in the way that I would like to be helped, then I will find someone that will. I think that's totally accurate, and people don't do it very often.
And I think it's very important. The flip side of this, unfortunately, in the society that we're living in now, is there's so much misinformation. As we're recording this podcast just this week, there was a guy in Atlanta that shot up the CDC because he had issues with the vaccines and all of that nonsense that is out there, and he was blaming the COVID vaccination for his issues, and he took it out on people literally. And so it's important, yes, to educate yourself, but it's also important to trust experts and to listen to doctors, to listen to nurses, and to be critical of the information that you're receiving, but also to make sure that the information that you're receiving is valid, because there's so much out there And unfortunately, it's coming from a lot of people in our own government today.
Yes. And thank you for saying that, because that is so true. There's such a fine line between wanting to be an expert on something that you haven't taken years to study versus advocating for yourself, and where your information is coming from too. If you have like a group of trusted healthcare professionals, ones that either you've had for a long time, like it's been your primary care doctor or your people for quite some time, and multitudes of these people are saying the same thing regarding the science. I don't think that you have to know necessarily how to interpret all of that data to think like logically this is probably not horrible. And that's another thing, is trusted healthcare professionals. But nursing was voted at one time the most trusted profession, I believe, like in the United States. And people still didn't, with COVID and all of the vaccines and everything, people still didn't take our word for it either. So
Yeah. So that leads me to a funny question, which is something I say is cults always hate medical care. Does the system of healthcare hate medical care? I'm going to go a little further, right? So in the military, we have very good healthcare, medical care, but we're not supposed to use it. And there's an attitude of shut up and drink a Motrin and carry on. And literally to the point that when we get out, we have to deconstruct that attitude. And so I've heard of many doctors and nurses that won't go to medical care, won't take their children to medical care. And I wonder if there's some sort of like institutional messaging that like, you're not supposed to use this.
that was a mic drop. Like, how did you say it? Does the system of medical care hate medical care? Yes, we do. Like, we don't, and you're supposed to still come to work. Like, no, you don't need a test. You don't need just take some ibuprofen, like you'll be fine. So many of us do that. I personally would never go to the emergency room unless I was quite quite clearly going to not be okay. And even then, I always joke that I might decease from a medical emergency, because I'll probably just assume that they'll say you'll be fine and then go away, because we normalize people's symptoms and experiences, and we ourselves are acting like it's no big deal. Like, your kid's fine. Why are you overreacting?
Yeah. Jess, we've got a few minutes left here, and I want to give you the opportunity. Is there something that you want us to know or want our audience to know about what you've experienced in the healthcare profession that perhaps we haven't talked about yet? And if so, what is that? Or what is one thing that you want to leave us with in this episode? And then also we want to talk about, when you finish that observation, how folks can follow you and get in touch with you if they'd like to do so.
Sure, yeah. So I think what I would want to leave people with is, clearly I've said many things here, and my experience is just my experience, as with any group. No one's a monolith, and we touched on this earlier, but so many people are meant to be nurses and to be doctors and to be, just because that was not my experience, and maybe I wasn't aware of what I was getting into, doesn't mean that it's going to be yours. And so if that is something that you want to do, by all means, like, we need you. You are not obligated, but just to let people know that they can do it. Like, I was somebody that was a complete wild child teenager, had substance abuse issues for a while, like all of these things, and really ended up trying something completely new and like rebuilding my GPA. And so you can do it regardless of your circumstances. And so I don't want to deter people necessarily from it, but like y'all said, I think have a critical eye and be skeptical, and don't sugarcoat what maybe you are signing up for. And to anybody that it's too late, you're already in the cult of healthcare, so to speak. It's take care of yourself, because we are taught to push everything down, and that we ourselves are the least important, and that's not true.
And this is one of, I think, across the board, one of the ways that I tell people to protect yourself from coercion and harm from cults is to value your time and your labor. And obviously, you can only do that so much when you're in a system that doesn't allow you to do that. But you can do it sometimes. I remembered how mad I was from being overworked as a young officer. And so then I stood up as much as I could when I was a senior officer. So that kind of thing. I want to talk about real quick The Culting of America, because it is out on pre-sale now, which is my new book. And I do talk about nursing quite a bit and just the caring professions. And if anyone wants to check that out, pre-sale links are in the deets. One of the things I talk about specifically with medical care is the exit costs, and not just the cost, right? One of I think the most hidden things that I've heard from nurses and doctors is losing that sense of certainty, losing that sense of what you were doing mattered, and that you were going to be able to kind of make your life in this system. How have you dealt with that?
First of all, I cannot wait to read your book. I'm so excited. But yes, the exit costs. Ooh, it has been, I describe it to people as a grieving process that I have gone through from multiple things. That I was in a job for a while that had a great culture, great leadership. And that job specifically really gave me this false sense of like, oh, it's going to be fine. Like, I actually love it here and I love these people. It turns out that since then they did layoffs due to the end of the pandemic. But they did some layoffs. And since then I never have found a similar feeling of emotional safety in the job. And so I think that for me, it's a grieving process. For a while, I was very angry or I was hurt, or I was, and for a minute I was in denial. And so it is very difficult to feel like you kind of wasted time. I don't know how else to say it. But also the rewarding aspect. So I've been lucky that I still feel in a sense that I can do that a little bit through social media and through different communities that I'm in through social media. But the costs, I think, are high to my emotional health, especially when you find yourself in your 30s and like without a career now. So
well, here's the thing I have for you. Some of my favorite fiction books are by people who went through, so there's one called Discovery of Witches, right? And it's written by a historian. And there are like, maybe you write a novel series on nurses, right? Like you still have that, what you went through in the background, right? Like one day, I have to submit everything I write to the Pentagon. So one day I'm going to write feminist military erotica simply for the purpose of submitting it to the Pentagon. But like, even though I'm out of the military, even though I kind of regret what I went through, but like I still always have that background of being a military officer and understanding that world. So especially as you are a creator, right? Like maybe there's still something about the nursing experience and knowledge that you have that you can bring to bear on what you do. And that's one of the things that I actually think is really cool about deconstructing your cult experience. And so like when I was leaving the military, they were ruining my career. I was basically told that the last 3 years of my career wouldn't count. I would have to do everything over again, all this silliness. As soon as I got out of the military, everything counted. I can use every part of my experience, right, to to bear going forward. So, and I think that is the cool thing about deconstructing, right? Like, I don't have to decide if my experience growing up in a cult in Brazil was good or bad. I still speak Portuguese and I can use that any way I want. So that, I guess, would just be my hopeful message to you. And like, if you wrote a series about nursing and you could have even like the cult overtones to it, oh, it would be so good.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, and Jess, you're doing some of that now, as far as speaking out and making your voice heard, and we want you to continue to do that. If folks that are listening want to follow you, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on most social medias as White Mess Express, WhiteMessExpress. Right now, primarily, I post on TikTok, but I'm also on Substack, YouTube, all of the places. Mostly, I just am very inconsistent. So TikTok, if you really want to see me more frequently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us tonight. And we encourage everyone just to follow you and to listen to what you have to say, and pre-order Daniella's brand new book, The Culting of America. Absolutely. And thank you all.
So excited.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being with us. Until next time, I'm Scot Loyd for Knitting Cult Lady Daniella Mestyanek Young. We'll see you on the next episode of Cults and the Culting of America.